right, good evening. Welcome back to AIMLOW. This is session 3 of this 6-session course, which means that we'll be halfway through the course once we are done with this session. So welcome back to everyone. Welcome to the people who are joining us for the first time. Maybe some of you are here for the first time. So good evening to you too, or good morning wherever you are, and whatever the time is in your time zone. So yes, hi everyone. We're going to wait for a couple more minutes so that everyone who is joining us can join us, because I can see that more people are joining.
And you turn the waiting room off so people can come
Yes.
in directly now, right?
Yes,
Perfect.
I did.
And if you haven't yet said hi, please feel free to say hi in the chat. Also feel encouraged to let us know where you're joining from, because that's exciting both for us and for a number of you as well. And just as we're getting started, we forgot last time, so we're going to start with this time mentioning our AI-generated nicknames on the title slide. So you should be able to see the title slide for the session, AIMLOW session 3, image recognition. And this is kind of well, it's not really a double session. There's a progression throughout the whole course, but image recognition goes hand in hand with image generation. So there will be some crossover between the two of those as well. And Kalina, do you want to explain our nicknames for today?
Yes, of course. Something we forgot last time, so I'll have to share also what's from last time. If you remember the first session, we told you that we used those AI-generated nicknames, which were generated by our very own baby GTP. So we decided to keep this going and have it come up with new nicknames every time. And since you were all so generous in putting your biographies as homework for the last session, we actually have plenty of material for it to generate. And so today we are Michael, the master's degree, and I am Kalina, hiking through nature. And because we forgot to share our nicknames last time, the nicknames from last time are Michael, PhD in all areas of physics. So you're degrading, PhD, now master's, the next one's gonna be bachelor's. And I was Kalina,
the next one will just be like primary school student, or like by the time we finish the course.
Yeah. And for me, it was Kalina, the dynamic pursuit of knowledge. So yeah, mine's a little bit more boring today too. Okay, so these are today's nicknames. Stay tuned in the next session for new nicknames. And also, so Michael, can you begin by recapping a few things?
Yes, of course. So as we mentioned, we're getting up on the halfway point through the course, 3 of 4, with the double middle session on image recognition and image generation. Here's a brief recap on what you missed last time, either just to prime you if you were here, to remind you of what we've got to this point, and if you weren't here, to say, well, this is kind of what we've done so far. So last time was all about language models, both because that's a very easy starting point. As I started saying that, I'm thinking nothing's very easy in explaining AI, but it's a logical or sensible starting point. As we'll see when we kind of talk about what we've seen so far as foreshadowing of what's to come, but also because language models, and especially ChatGPT, are two of the biggest things that most people have heard of, more people have used than any other aspect. So like a good starting point. And two of the big things, especially when I was talking to people before starting this course, teachers are wondering, how do we tell if text is made by AI? And how do we use it well? So those are like 2 checklists we're going to recap on today. As a reminder, these were kind of community generated or semi-curated, where we were asking you, following the AI generated biography versus human generated biography, how can we tell the text was generated by AI? And so some of the key things to look for were odd perspectives. We noticed one of the ones that was written in, I think, third person sounded fake, but then I showed one where I'd asked ChatGPT to make it sound like it was written by me or written like a person, and then it switched to first person view. So that combined with odd contexts and tenses, way too much structure, where it looks a lot more ordered than we'd expect. One that we didn't talk about last time, but I added on to the list afterwards because Kalina and I had talked about this for a long time before, and we shared each other graphs of it and stuff like that, is the idea of an average tone. And this is partly an artifact of how a language model works because it's using predictive text. So it'll kind of average all of the existing text that it can find out there, like almost like a weighted average of the whole internet. It's not exactly what it does. Well, it's not what it does at all, but we'll tend to have things more in the middle of the bell curve rather than less extreme. And that relating to one of the last points is the lack of tangents or other distractions. As you'll notice, especially if you know me well, or if you've seen me in other contexts rather than just this course as well, you'll know that I love going off on tangents because it's that I found something that in the moment is more interesting to me than the plan I had ahead of time. AI doesn't do that. So a complete lack of tangents or like losing track, that's something humans do when we write all the time. And for me, it's one of my favorite things, not only to do, but to read in someone else's writing. But you can understand why that's probably not a feature that is a priority training AI to do, to go off on random tangents. And then the final one was one I added after our discussions as well. And it's just simply ask it. Like the easiest way for me to have a confident measure where I can give it a number and I can give reasons that wasn't just me saying, okay, it looks like this text was generated by AI, is to ask an AI thing like ChatGPT, look at this text, tell me what's the probability that it was generated using AI, and how can you tell? And that's a very easy way or a very useful way to do that. Does anyone, including Kalina, but anyone via the chat or otherwise, have anything they want to add to this list, like anything we might have missed that you feel was an important part of the discussion that came out last time on how to recognize AI?
If you do, feel free to write it and we will add it, even if you write it a little bit later.
Even if you think of it weeks down the road, if it's really good, let us know. And with that being said, some of the other things we saw last time, so we saw baby GTP, so our very own, or well, mainly Kalina's very own, but I mean, I'm losing my slides everywhere. So we saw how that worked. We looked at training it, and that as a model for how bigger, more complex models are used. And this we'll refer back to sometimes when we explain how image generators work, because I think we already mentioned, if not, I hope I would have already mentioned, that a lot of the basis for image generation is just comparing lines of ones and zeros, like binary lines of ones and zeros, and how it actually does that is pretty similar whether it's doing that from text or from an image. And one of the key pieces is just the transformation from the human readable or like the human visible output, whether it's an image, whether it's a text, whether it's input from a particle physics experiment, and then it's looking for patterns and comparing patterns that way. So there are a lot of analogies here. Then the other thing which I figured was really important to go over before I move on is tips for how to prompt AI. This, again, is one of the main take-homes for the classroom, but it also applies for images. Well, for the most part. I mean, there's similar things that apply for images. But the idea, and for images, this falls apart a little bit, and we'll see this more next week with image generation. The idea of asking to do various versions of the same. Images use a lot more processing power, and a lot of image generators will have limitations on how many images you can generate, especially if you're using free accounts, which unless you're a professional, unless you know for sure it's something you want to invest in, probably a lot of you are using free accounts. So like that first piece of advice, tell it to generate 10 different images. You can try that with one that's a free image generator, but the lack of self-awareness, which we mentioned with GPT, getting all the letters messed up again. A lot of these generators won't realize or warn you that they have a limit on the number of images you generate until you reach the limit. So it can be frustrating. But then key things also for images, the results are only good as the prompts you give. Be overly detailed, because otherwise it's going to guess what you want it to do. And especially if you're doing text, I haven't played around with this much with images. Tell it if you want it to sound more human. Like my example, I said, intentionally add some mistakes because it might not do that on its own. And then I sort of skipped over in the list. The key one that I wanted to end with is the take-home one, because it's something I'm guilty of doing a lot. Limit how much time you spend reading anything that AI will generate for you, because this is the first time in human history, more or less, that we can generate text faster than we can read it. Throughout most of history, someone needed to actually write any text we'd read. And so by the nature of someone having taken the time to write it, it was worth reading. Now we can generate things faster than any person could possibly read. And if you fall into the trap of wanting to read everything, you could spend a lifetime just reading potentially useless garbage. Does anyone have anything to add to that list? Doesn't sound like it. So we'll move on to the homework for today, which was some reading and some watching. And just a brief recap, in case anyone, I mean, teachers are often the worst students. If someone told me to do homework, I probably either wouldn't bother or would remember at the very last minute and be kind of lost if I was expected to know what was done in it. So for that reason, as much as anything else, a brief recap on some of the key points to get out of the reading about the Nobel Prize in Physics, which was announced last week to the day, a couple hours before we actually had our session, and a Steve Mould video where he uses generative AI to make an optical illusion, both because it's very relevant and because Steve Mould's awesome in general. So a couple things on, and this is like direct image taken from the Nobel Prize website, the article that was the homework reading. Neural networks mimicking the brain, relating this to what we saw last time. So you see how there's different strengths of nodes, and here this was like first principles of generative text. So this wasn't yet training a network, but we were looking at weights of different nodes between words, and that being how the model was built. When models are trained, then it's looking at the weight between nodes and strengthening connections that are stronger. So that's one of the key take-homes from that. The other one for Hopfield networks was the analogy of pathways that are solutions to a lowest energy state. So as the article says, Hopfield was looking at analogy to magnetic spin and how magnetic spin of adjacent atoms will affect the overall magnetic moment of a magnetic material, and how you can calculate it as an addition of all these moments and their relations to each other. So direct analogy to a physical property that hadn't previously been used in computation, or at least not in that way. And so that was why, rather than this falling into another field, this was considered a physics development, because it was based on some fundamental physics. And then the other fundamental physics one was the Boltzmann machine using statistical physics. So borrowing from thermodynamics and how you can calculate states of different systems and how we can do that with different layers or networks. So those were kind of the take-homes from that article. Then the idea of what Steve Mould did, creating illusions, the idea of adding noise, removing the noise, then looking at if you're removing the noise from nothing and you can iterate till you get an actual image. That's a bit of foreshadowing to next time on image generation, but some elements of that are pretty useful for figuring out how image identifiers work. So we'll hear a bit more on that from Kalina in a minute. Before we go further, because now we're about 15 minutes in, which is a good time to avoid people who not to avoid to avoid avoiding people who arrived late. Here's a link to the attendance form, which I'll put. Kalina, will you put in the chat or should I put it in the chat?
I'll
Because I
put it
need
in the
to.
chat.
Okay, so please fill out today's attendance form. It's not a very cognitive heavy task. So once the link's there, we'll probably go on and keep talking. Hopefully you can handle doing that at the same time as Kalina starts explaining image classification. If anyone's really like thrown off by confused by multitasking, shout out to us and we'll slow down. But I think most of you guys can handle that.
Yes, and the link is already in the chat. So yes, I guess while we're having this technical time switching, I can the other people can already start filling the form. So yeah, Michael, I'm going to use the fact that you have shared your screen showing these few intro slides into classification. But once I start demonstrating how our own classifier works, we will have to switch to sharing my screen. But for now, it's all good. So yes, as I start talking about classification, I shall ask you to once again excuse me and my voice because I am still sick, so I might need to take some coughing breaks. Sorry about that. But yes, we are going to talk about image classification today, and as we've already mentioned a couple times, not only baby GTP, we have also created our very own image classifier. And actually, something new is that we are also in the process of creating our very own image generator. But let's see how that one turns out for the next session. Now we are concentrating on image classification, which from the title you guessed that is basically teaching algorithms, machine learning algorithms to put things into categories. And so not only images, anything really, any type of input data can be classified and put into categories. And I'm going to give you an example with the very first algorithm I created in my life when I started doing machine learning a couple years ago, which was to classify events in a particle detector based on the number of particles which entered the detector at some point of time. So what happened is that we had to take some waveform created by particles, and we had to ask our algorithm to put it in a category based on whether that waveform was created by 1, 2, 3, or 4 particles. And today we're not going to classify particles, and we're not going to look at waveforms. We're going to look at something a little bit more practical and something a little bit more useful when we're teaching, and it's going to be animals, because that is the classic example. And once again, I'm going to do the analogy with teaching young children about the world. Many of the children's books that we buy them, the first books of all kids are basically books about animals, and they learn to recognize animals. So it's good when we teach computers to maybe start with something that we ourselves are quite familiar with teaching about. So yeah, cats, dogs, horses, you're going to hear this a lot today. And what you see on the slide here is actually pretty much how our own classification neural network works. This is not a diagram of the network that we created, but it's something very similar, and you're going to see basically on the next slide. But yeah, first things first, this convolution neural network, this might already be a familiar word to you, and you have heard it in the previous 2 sessions. It's a type of neural network, and convolution really stands for the way the layers of this network go around the data, which is through the process of convolution. And we also had a convolutional network in baby GTP. It was one of the models. And if the ones who were here for the last session remember, I told you that convolution is not very good for like text generation and all of this kind of stuff. I told you that LSTM models were better for that. Well, here in the classification, more importantly for the image classification or any kind of two-dimensional data, convolution is very strong. Like, this is where it really comes to play. And also something I mentioned that is very, very worth noting is that basically we're talking about images. And when we tell a person image, maybe like you think a photo or something, or a painting, a drawing, whatever. But for a computer, like, we can call an image any kind of two-dimensional data. So you have a square of numbers, you have a matrix. It might not be square, it might be a rectangle, but it just needs to be 2D or whatever 2D shape. There you go, you have an image. Because in the end,
And to an extent, it wouldn't necessarily even need to be 2D. It's just we can't
yeah,
picture this. Like,
yeah. But when we talk
well,
about,
like a good example from your work is particle physics experiments. You could have a detector that doesn't just have a 2D array. This exact same thing applies to it.
yeah, and actually, my data from the detector, I call it images, even though it's not images. But yeah, the moral of this is that whether we're looking at photos of dogs and cats or some kind of data, we are really only looking at two-dimensional matrices of numbers. Because the ones of you who are more into, for example, photography or using computers to alter data for some way know that the images that we take are really just pixel values. So we have a matrix of pixels, and we have, if we're looking at an RGB scheme, we have just 3 numbers for the red, green, and blue in each of these little squares we call pixels, and so on and so on. But in the end, it all comes down to a matrix of numbers. And the convolution that I was talking about, it really means that this matrix of numbers is parsed through the different layers. And if you remember, the layers were the different floors of our algorithm, of our architecture, the building. So they are passed through the different layers. And as you see here on the image, these little yellow squares that are defined are what we call the windows or the kernels. So they are little submatrices of numbers which they are passed through the image, and they search for certain features. So they are multiplied, added, passed through different mathematical operations, and they're looking for some maxima. They're looking for something in the image to pop that would make us say, okay, this is a cat, for example, or this is a zebra or something like that. And if you actually do not move to the next slide. I just want to point out to the last 3 blue circles. So this is the last floor of our architecture. And the reason that they are 3 is that in this case, the image that I took from the internet, we are classifying this image in 3 categories: a horse, a zebra, or a dog. And what I want to point out here is that the number of categories that we want to classify our data in should be the number that stays on the last floor, on the very top floor of our architecture. Or really, should be like the bottom, because we are going from up to down. This will make more sense if we now change the slide, please. Great. Which has the very same picture, but then it has also a little snippet of the code that is our classifier. And it's actually how I coded the different layers that our algorithm is going to go through. And the reason I put this here is that I really want to make a connection between this random image I took from the internet. It was basically like the first image that comes when I write convolutional neural network. And the code that I wrote for classifying our images. And you can see all the layers .conv2d, max pooling. These are all the layers that you actually see the different stages in the image. You can see that the third from the bottom says layers.flatten. Well, we have a flattened layer in the image, which is kind of in the middle, which actually the purpose of this is to take from this kind of more complex mathematical operations that the convolution does and make everything into just a simple array of numbers, like one-dimensional, one next to each other. And then it starts making all of those fully connected layers, many connections, many neurons, and so on, until at the image it goes down to 3. And if you look at the last layers dot dense in my code, there is a number that says 2 right next to the letter dense in the brackets, and activation softmax, that's something different. So the reason it's 2 is because our classifier now works classifying things into 2 categories. But if we wanted to classify them into 3 or 5, all I need to do is just change that number. So yeah, this is how our classifier works. Once again, as with baby GTP, anyone who wants the code, write me an email, and at some point I will see that the updated version of the code is on GitHub so that anyone can download it from there. But just want to point out that this one is also completely free for everyone that needs and wants to use it. And I also want to point out that it's a very basic entry-level neural network that really anyone who studies something about machine learning, even like students at school which have curriculums more oriented towards computer science, this is done by 8th and 9th graders easily. So it's a very, very simple thing in terms of code. But before I start demonstrating it, one last thing that you're going to see on next slide, and I'm going to use the time to take a sip of water. So this is another part of the code, and the code really doesn't matter. It's actually, it does what now I am going to tell you about, which is that this is the first time we are going to deal with something different in terms of machine learning. Because you, at least some of you, saw the demonstration of baby GTP last time. And also in the first session, we talked about two very important terms, which are supervised learning and unsupervised learning. And just a very quick recap. So with unsupervised learning, we are giving only the data to the algorithm, and we rely on the algorithm to find different patterns in the data. And then later, when prompted, to use them to construct new things. So this is the other case. This is now going to be supervised learning. So when we supervise the learning, means that with the data, we also provide the algorithm with information about the truth for the data it is training on, which in our case means that we are giving the algorithm a set of images of cats and dogs. And for each image, we tell the truth to the algorithm. Is this a cat or is this a dog? And we want it to learn from each image and knowing the truth about it, how to recognize cats and dogs. So once again, unsupervised learning, it searches for patterns on its own and then just generates new data. And with supervised learning, it learns the truth about some things, and then we want it to predict the truth about things we know nothing about. That's what we're going to do now. And just in our case, the more like maybe mathematical way of saying this is that if you look at the code and towards the bottom, it says if there's dog in the file name, labels append 1, 0, which basically means that the tag for dog will be 1 and then a 0. And else, if there's a cat in the name of the file, append 0, 1. So that's how we tell the computer to distinguish between a dog image and a cat image. How I've done it is that I've basically named the dog images dog 1, dog 2, dog 1000, cat 1, cat 2, cat 5, cat 1000. And I'm telling it, okay, if it has dog in the name, label it as 1, 0. If it has cat in the name, label it as 0, 1. And that's how it's going to distinguish them. There are other ways to do that, but this is like the most common one, maybe. So maybe now would be a good time to share my screen. and show you all of this. And since I'm going to do all of this live, we have to be prepared for some unexpected circumstances, but I try to train it as smoothly as possible. But since there are a lot of things I want to show, I will have to switch between tabs a lot and so on. So there might be some technical time for this. And yeah, let's just see. Okay. So if we want to take a little bit of a look at the code once again, this is how the whole code for this classifier looks like. Again, some of you might not be very interested in coding, so I just won't spend much time on it. Anyone who wants it, once again, is free to ask for it. But we are loading the images, doing the labels. This is what you saw in the slide here for dog and cat. Splitting the data for training and validating, because when we train a neural network, it uses a portion of the data to train, and then in the process of training, it tests itself on the remainder of the data. So this is done in this part. We also, of course, need to be sure that all of the images look the way that we want. They're all the same. As I told you last time, algorithms are not very bright, or they're as bright as we made them, and mine are not very bright. So they need to be sure that the size of the images is always the same, and so on. Then we have the model that I already showed you in the slide. Then we train the model, and then we predict an image. And that's what we're going to do right now. But just before we do that, I actually wanted to show you how the data set that we are going to be training on looks like. So this is a data set I found online, and it's a data set of many, many images of dogs and cats. So if we go into like training set, go into dog, and I'm going to just take a very, very random image like dog 95, for example. This is dog 95. So it's all these images that we're going to use for training. This is dog 85, and so on. And this is a very good time to say that on the internet, there's many, many different data sets with information that can be used for training algorithms for educational purposes. This is the first one I found. And one more thing to point out is that we have a training set and we have a test set. So this is done for us to be sure that we have trained an algorithm well enough and it's not overfitting. So we've already talked about overfitting, an algorithm just learning the data and not being able to come with anything new and anything meaningful. This is why, to be sure, we have a training set and we have a separate test set with other cats and dogs, and you see them here. So just so that no one suspects that I'm lying about something, I'm going to train it on the training set data, and then when we predict, I'm going to use other data from the test set. So I want to go back to the code, and you remember how we had different number of epochs when we were training, and I'm going to actually set the training to 100 epochs. And then just to be sure, okay, I'm going to save the model as a model classify.
Can we go back a second? Can I ask you
Yeah.
just a quick question about the training data?
Yes.
So with the training data, because I've had it where you can have a chunk of images and then you decide which ones are going to be training, which ones are. Did you find all of yours in the same place and then divide it, or did you find them from two different places? And how would that affect how the algorithm works?
I'm not sure I follow your question very well, because in the training data, we have the training data divided for training and validation during the process of training. And then we have this test set, which is completely independently used once the model is already trained. So which one are you asking about?
Well, I guess all three. Like, so the training data, let's say there's 100 dog pictures, right? Then you might take 80 and then 20 for validation. But then when you go to actually test it afterwards, where did those pictures come from? And will they be
That
equal to the others?
no,
Like if they
they're
want to
completely
a
different.
subset of the same bigger set,
Yeah.
then
The ones that come for
if,
testing.
if you think of an extreme example of this, if you have one set where you got it from a database that was like someone in Alaska taking pictures of their dogs, so you have mainly huskies. And then you have someone, say, in France and like in Paris who has poodles. Those are both databases of dogs, but if you train on one database and you grab from the other, you might get some funny results, right?
Fair point, yes. In this case, everything comes from the same place. So we cannot account for that at this point. But yeah, very, very good. Actually, at some point, we have to try with what you are saying. But so far, we cannot account for that right now. So coming back to the code, just want to be sure that everything will be done properly, everything is written as it should. And so now we are going to let it train. And I just want to be sure that it has started training properly. Good. We will have 100 epochs. And while we are training the 100 epochs, I want to tell you a little bit more about the actual prediction that is going to happen afterwards. Because what we want to do afterwards, as I said, is give it an independent image that has not been used in the training anywhere, neither for training nor for validation. And we are going to ask it to predict it, whether it's a dog or a cat. And really what it's going to do is, while it's training, I'm going to switch back to the code. So if you remember, we were saying we have 1, 0 for dog and 0, 1 for cat. And the prediction is going to be two numbers, two positions. And if there's a dog in the picture, what we expect is the prediction to say 1, 0. Well, algorithms are not perfect. So if I should predict the prediction, if I pass a dog picture to it, it should say that it's, for example, 0.85. And then like for this first position right here. And then for the second position, it's not going to say completely 0. It's going to say, for example, 0.1. And it's not even necessary for those two to add to 1. The meaning of all of this is that the output is basically going to be on the first position, the probability of the image being a dog, and on the second position, the probability of the image being a cat, because that's how we have coded it. Here in the truth, the universal truth is that any dog image has a 1 or 100% probability of being a dog and 0% probability of being a cat. Whereas every cat image has 0% probability of being a dog and 100% probability of being a cat. Let me just see how we are with the training. You can see it now that we are at epoch number 65. And you see that the accuracy here, it's already at 100%. It says 1. And the validation accuracy is a sturdy 0.8, for example, which is good. And those two numbers basically mean that because we're only giving it 1,000 pictures, by now it's learned to predict all of them. And the validation, however, if it's only 0.8, this means that still when presented with new data, it's more probably to make a correct prediction, but still not exactly 100% sure. And these two numbers are really the performance on the way that I was telling you, Michael, earlier. We are splitting the training data set into a part for training and a part for validating in the process of training. That's why we have accuracy and validation accuracy. So we have just a couple more seconds, like 4 epochs to go. These 100 epochs were quite a lot, to be honest. But let's
Well, unlike with text, it doesn't seem to be getting significantly faster per step. Like the step value, I mean, already was a lot slower when we were doing a fairly small body of text because the number of computations was much smaller. But as it went along, it got a lot faster per epoch. Whereas here, at least the last several have remained constant.
Yeah. The thing is that we have quite a small data set. So these 100 epochs were just way too much, and it wasn't doing anything meaningful maybe after the harvest. So I need to copy the path docs. And how about we go for doc.4047, for example. We can see it later, .jpg. And basically, if I move the zoom controls for myself, I will also see, but I think everyone sees, that it said that the image is a doc. So our classifier is classifying correctly. And if we take a look at doc 4047, that's how it looks like. So we can also do this. So now that we have saved the model, I have written a little bit faster code. Just want to check it, yeah, which only does the prediction without training a new neural network. So this is it here. And if we want to run that, just to show you that it can also classify cat pictures, we can go and run that. Go to dataset. Let's go to test set. Cats. And we can see, for example, cat 4007. Okay, and it crashed, and it said that the image is a dog. The risks of being live. So anyway, I'm gonna look at why did it classify a cat as a dog. Maybe we need to see the cat. Oh, that's very much a cat. Okay, so I'm going to look at why it did that. Might have overfit, might have been an error somewhere on my end. But what I want to show you now is actually how we can go a little bit deeper into how things are trained. And for that reason, I'm going to train an algorithm once again, the same network. I'm just going to do it in 30 epochs because, as we saw, 100 epochs is a little bit overkill. So this won't take as much time. And we're going to train a similar model on the similar data set of cats and dogs. And I'm going to actually show you and visualize the output of the networks. So we're almost halfway there. And while we are doing that, I want to scroll a little bit back through my terminal and show you this here, which is the architecture of the model. Once it's compiled, it displays the different layers that we have coded in our code. So let's see, 6 more epochs. And I talked a lot already about model architectures, how things look, and how they perform. And what I'm going to show you now is actually the a little bit of explainability methods, which is a way to visualize what's happening on the different steps of training these algorithms. And I brought you back here because we need to see the names of the different layers. And I want to visualize one of these convolutional layers and what it does to the image. And I have already in the code pre-selected one of the test dog images and one of the test cat images. So let's see. Let's choose this conv to the one layer. And you see how my code asks for the filter number. So if you remember the presentation, and I told you about those little windows that are moved on the image and they calculate different weights, basically there's a lot of them that are initialized. And in the process of training an algorithm, what really happens is that each of them starts to be responsible for a different feature, a different pattern that is searched for in the data. And in our case, our layer has 64 filters. This last number here tells us the number of filters. So I can choose to visualize each one of them, and I will just randomly choose, for example, number 26. And just let's allow it to load. So this is the dog image that was randomly chosen. This is the randomly chosen cat image. And as you can see, they're very square. They don't look good. This is because they have been cut and rescaled so that they all look the same. But this is how the filter activation looks like. So this is how the weights, the whole idea of perception for the neural network works on these images. So what you see basically, and what I see, is that I have randomly selected the filter that is responsible probably for the ears and the back of the animal. Because if you look at this sort of a heat map here, you see how the places that are very well traced are the back of the dog, and here its ear and the upper part of its head and its next ear. All of them are in yellow, which is like the hottest points of this filter. And if we look at the cat, we have the same thing. Basically, we have the back of the cat, and here we see very well traced the ears of the cat. So we have randomly selected the one filter that is responsible for detecting ears, and especially with classifying animals, it turns out that the ears are something quite important. So what I'm going to do now is actually I'm going to screenshot the output of this and place it back right in our presentation so that all of you have a little reminder of what we saw. And at some point I can actually like choose a different filter and repeat this whole process and see what we find out. We might find the one that's responsible for the tail or the nose or something like that. So, okay, back to this. We can visualize all of the filters and everything that happens in the network. And now I want to move to something which is even more important, which is the saliency map, because this is the map that really combines everything that the neural network has learned. What I mean by this is that it shows us on these images, the image of the dog and the image of the cat, which regions of the image are the most important for the animal to be recognized as either a dog or a cat. So here we see that basically we have parts of the face. Ironically, the person's hand that is holding the dog is very, very hot here, but also the legs. The legs make a huge difference when we talk about dogs, cats, and so on. And for the cat, you see that the ears, the eyes, sorry, are the things that are like the hottest on this heat map. So once again, the saliency map shows us which parts of the data have the biggest role when, let's say, classifying something. Or really when constructing the output of any algorithm with any purpose whatsoever. So this saliency map thing is maybe like the most important thing when we talk about explaining AI and AI explainability. And I'm also going to put this here. There we go. So as I've put it here, is the ultimate tool for explainability. So you saw how our classifier works, or in some cases when I overtrain it, it doesn't work. So now what we are going to do is actually train it, not train it, but use it to predict your input. So for the ones who read the email that we sent you, we put in there a little request for you to either make a drawing, it could be a doodle or it could be a watercolor drawing of either a cat or a dog, to be classified by this model, which I will have to retrain because I kind of overdid it while demonstrating. But anyway, we asked you to either draw or to find the most confusing image you could find on the internet that could confuse an AI model. And some of you already submitted that, but for the others, we would really like some more input and more things to play with and things to challenge it with and test it on. So let's say that we give you a couple more minutes to, if anyone wants to simply draw something on a piece of paper that resembles a cat or a dog, or look for a funny image online. And please put it in the form, which, Michael, I'm going to ask you to paste the link for that form once again in the chat.
Already did what just when you started mentioning it.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So yes, once again, a doodle of a cat or a dog on a piece of paper, and you can take the image with your phone and upload it in the form, or find online an image that is funny, confusing for people or for AI, and download it and re-upload it in the form. And while we are doing the next bit of this session, I'm actually going to take them. I will retrain the model so that it works properly. And I'm going to see, and we're going to actually see it live. I'm going to do it in front of you. But we are going to see whether you will be able to confuse this model. And so you have a little bit of time to do that. Once again, the link is in the chat. And you don't need to rush because you'll have time as I'm actually going to the next slide. Okay, your turn to challenge our model. And to tell you also about another little experiment that we did. So we decided.
And just before you start mentioning that, in case it wasn't clear to anyone, the link is in the chat, but one of the main reasons why we emailed it to you ahead of time is because we figured there'd be some people who would be similar to me if I was attending as a participant, and I would be joining from my laptop, like I'm presenting from my laptop. But if I draw a drawing, I'm not going to figure out how to use my laptop's webcam. I'm going to grab my phone, but the link is in the chat that I'm on my laptop with. So if you have email to your phone, like that's one of the reasons why we sent it ahead of time in an email. So if you're trying to figure out, but the link's in the chat, but I'm not in the chat on the thing I'm taking a photo with, you have it in both places. If you need it in more places, let us know and we'll help you troubleshoot that, but hopefully the two is good enough. Also, just related to that, right after I sent that, there was a request for the attendance form link in the chat. I didn't share it yet in case anyone gets confused between that and the image submission form, but I'll add the link to the attendance one in another couple minutes. But I'm just holding off not sharing it in case there's anyone who gets confused which link is which, but we're still waiting for the images. So I will share that just in like, I don't know, 5 more minutes or so. I'll add the attendance one again.
Yes. Yeah, thank you. And we would be really, really happy if more and more of you tried and experimented with trying to confuse our algorithm and to see what you come up with. So moving on. And yes?
Well, I was just going to say, often the best way to understand how something works is to try and break it. So here's an invitation to try and break this model. Just like how last time we were talking about how we had fun trying to break text models. If something's working well, it only tells you how it works well, but it doesn't necessarily tell you about its inner workings. So really be creative if you want and try and make it like try and have things as confusing as possible.
Yeah. So while you're doing that, a little bit of a fun thing that we try to do is, let's see if we can only take 100 photos from my phone gallery, completely random photos that I took, and 100 random photos from Michael's. And let's see if this model is smart enough to try and distinguish photos made by me and made by Michael. So because we do not have much time to show how this works, and this was also implemented in something that Michael's showing you in a second, I'm not going to go very deep into this. But basically, it turned out that only 100 photos is nowhere near enough for an algorithm to try and learn the specific patterns of my photo taking and the specific ones of Michael's. So, for example, if because Michael's photos contained many more photos of food than mine. And so when we tried to pass a photo of my lunch to that trained model, it just straight told us that it was the photo taken by Michael. So instead of this model actually trying to find the deeper patterns of, for example, how I frame photos, of the light that is around me, that surrounds me, and so on, it just learned to recognize certain objects because it was presenting with so little data. That is basically overfit. And so if we have more time in one of the next sessions, if someone's interested, we can show you the results from that. And we could also expand it with more people if someone's interested and willing. So if you are, just let us know. But that being said, I'm actually going to take some time off to concentrate on the results from your guys' drawings and internet searches. And while I am doing that, I'm going to give the floor back to Michael to show you how everything that I showed you so far can actually be done, not through coding and writing some elaborate code, but with something much more user-friendly and maybe better than my code. So I'm stopping screen sharing now, and Michael, it's your turn.
Perfect, thank you. So I'll take over sharing my screen in just a moment. Also to mention for anyone who missed out on the attendance form earlier, I've now added it into the chat. Hopefully that was a long enough time to avoid confusion with the image submission form. And we saw we got a handful more images, which Kalina is frantically trying to train in the background now. So I'm going to show you well, I'm going to share my screen and then show you. So here is a trainable machine or a teachable machine that's ready to use. And in terms of classroom use, if you just want to have something that's ready to go, you can upload images ready for students to use. Then Teachable Machine by Google is a handy one to use for that. I'm not trying to say it's the best one out there, or I'm not trying to compare different models or anything. It's just this one is a particularly easy one to use. So I'm going to talk through the model of photos from my phone and Kalina's phone. You'll notice I have different tabs open in the back. I'll get to that in a second, but without further ado, I'll have it start uploading my photos, because sometimes it takes a long time, which is why I have ones with it already done in the background. 100 photos from Michael. And so you can see as I'm talking, and I'll show you like different parts of what you can do in the model, it doesn't look like it's doing anything. And if we get back to it in, say, 15 seconds, 30 seconds, then we'll see my 100 photos start popping up. In case that doesn't happen, let's go to one of the two other tabs. This one is with a comically slow training. So it's been going for 153 minutes and coming on 20 seconds. It gives you a warning when you try and switch out of the tab, not to switch tabs, or else it'll drop the processing power it dedicates to the task. And it drops it almost to nothing. Like you can see at the rate it's going through epochs here, it wouldn't have taken 2.5 hours to get to this point if this tab had been opened. I think I'm just going to leave that in the background to see how it keeps doing, and we'll get back to that later. But there is one where like it trained on 50. This is ready to go. If it doesn't Okay, yeah, so this one, it's too slow. We'll have the one that's already trained and I'll just go with that. But believe me, like if we had infinite patience, then those 100, which I said to import, it would import those. It's just gonna, loading a sample. But no, I mean, by the time we load my sample, then Kalina's sample, let's go to the one where it's already loaded. You can also save the state and reload it here. So this is just kind of skipping the point. So just believe me that I did load 100 images, just like the other tab said. 101 from Kalina's. I don't know how, I guess we got an extra image that's not from her phone there. I'll delete that. So we get back down to 100 images. It already trained the model. I'll go through. Ooh, I accidentally added a class. Let's delete that class. Okay. So I'm going to train the model again, just so it's ready and it's not with that photo. It's only on 50 epochs, so it'll take like 30 seconds to do once it starts going. We can see it just fires through those epochs. And it's only once you start saying, like the other one, I was like, come on, do 5,000. You can do it. So it's training, then the next thing it'll give me is a default. By default, it uses my webcam. So I'll just turn my webcam on. And it's saying with 90 something percent confidence, I mean, it switches around if I move quickly, but then it says this is pretty clearly one that would be a photo I took. It's probably because of me appearing in it. I appear more in my photos than I do in Kalina's photos. Although we did see each other in Bulgaria a couple of weeks ago, so if we just completely random uploaded those, I know I took ones of her out of mine, so it didn't confuse what we're trying to train. I don't know if she did the same. So that's from my webcam. But if I switch from the webcam to a file, then we have, just like Kalina did with the dog and cat video, we trained on 100 photos of each of ours, but then there's 100 new photos of mine, which I'll select one of those photos. And I don't know which this one is of. We'll see. And again, it sometimes takes a while. This will be like 15 seconds. Okay. That's of, oh, it thinks that was Kalina's photo, but it's a sister of my, sorry, sister of my photo, a photo of my sister in the desert in Morocco that I took a year and a half ago. And so it misidentified that one. We can try and identify with a new image. So 100 new photos of mine as well. Another random photo of mine. Again, kind of painfully slow to load. Oh, here it's got really mixed reviews. And this is weird because this very same photo, it had 90 something percent confidence when I trained it with more epochs. So maybe it's worth training with a couple more epochs to see. I have a couple more things to say. So let's set these epochs. Don't want to go too high because I want it to be fairly quick. Let's go 140. And then train the model again on 140. And as it's training that, a couple of things I wanted to mention about this. So you can see other than, oh, and this is the famous don't switch tabs. So if you do switch tabs, it won't crash, but the speed goes way down. So like if you're in a hurry, don't switch tabs. If you're not in a hurry, like I might leave this one in the background and see how many days it can get up to for that one. Probably not, but I mean, we'll see. Anyways, this can be used for really easy intro projects in the classroom. Some of the most common ones are identifying furniture around the classroom. So taking pictures of chairs, of tables, of stools, taking pictures of people, pictures of animals like we saw dogs versus cats. Oh, we see now when webcam's going on trying to train again. But for all kinds of different things, one of the big ones I want to try and do, and this is one Kalina has been helping me out with, but we're struggling to find a good data set. So if anyone has good data or just a heck of a lot of photos they've taken, it could be useful. But I want to train one to identify plant versus animal cells when teaching kids intro microscopy, like things like onion cells, blood cells, cheek cells, that kind of thing. And I think it could make, and I need to frame it a lot better, but it could make a really interesting citizen science project where a bunch of people submit a couple of photos of different kinds of cells. But so now that this is trained, let's go and look for a new file. We'll see how well it identifies. Why is it not letting me identify a file? Okay, here. Oh, will it keep that one? Will it say if it thinks that's mine? Yes, okay. So with more epochs, this same photo, now it's very confident it's mine. So for me, that's like a very telling show of how we went from 50 epochs to 140 epochs. This photo, which it previously identified with some uncertainty, like 60%, it thought it was Kalina's photo. Now 99% sure it's one of my photos. And I'll go again to the Michael new photo. So again, this is not the data set it was trained on, but a completely different set of photos. Let's load up a different one, see if it's able to tell that it was, oh, okay, only 75% sure. This is a guy who gave me tea when I was biking by in the desert, and he waved me over. It was like he's got a construction vest or something. Like it was a part of a roadside crew. To this day, I don't know what kind of works they were doing. I couldn't see much they were doing other than sitting there drinking tea. But very friendly guy in the desert who gave me tea on that occasion. So anyways, this is a handy, ready to use for classroom applications, trainable or teachable machine. Kalina, how's it going on training on those confusing images?
I hope that I have unmuted myself. Okay, I think I have. Yeah, so almost all of your images are actually now transferred to my computer back at my university so that that can be done quickly. So I just need a minute or so to check the model and run the code, and basically we will be done. So let me do a test without sharing my screen, just to be sure that all of the code is running properly.
Well, if you need about a minute, that's about a perfect amount of time for me to show how to like save projects in that part, because that relates to the homework for next time. So
Yes.
I wanted to show that, but I wanted to see how things are going with you. So
Awesome.
two important, well, I mean, there's an arbitrarily large number of important things, but the two things I wanted to show you are how to save your project. So you can save this project to Drive. And oh, I guess I already saved it and then was opening it, but now it'll save it again. And one thing I realized when preparing this, it saves the like sets of samples I uploaded, so it'll open those quickly without needing to take forever to load the images like it did in the other tab where I said I'm giving up waiting for that to do it. So that's how you can save it to go back and work on it later. And it's handy if you want to skip the time of uploading all of the images. It's worth being aware that unless you uploaded the files directly from your drive, in which case it just points to the files in your drive, which is all it does here. And I don't for the life of me know why it's taking so long to save. But it shouldn't take up more storage in my drive, or not significantly more storage. Whereas if you had been uploading from your computer or elsewhere, then when you go to save it to Drive, it saves all of the images in your drive. I think, although I haven't bothered checking this, it saves the reduced size image. So if you go into under the hood, you can see that's not what it looked like an hour ago when I checked what it was. Maybe it's the advanced settings. There's a setting where you can decide between two choices of how big the image is. Like in Kalina's one, she's dropping the resolution to 150 by 150 pixels, making it a square one. Trainable machine, you have 92 by 92 grayscale, or 200 and something small, like 230, 216 by 216, having it color. Anyways, it wouldn't make sense if it's saving a full copy of the photos and not just at the resolution you wanted to. So it's going to take a fraction of the size, but If you are loading like hundreds of samples, thousands if you want to train yours very well, be aware that if it's not stuff that's already on your drive, it will take up space on your drive. Also be aware that when you save it, like saving the project this way, it's saving the images and the sets of images, but it's not saving the training state. So you'll need to reload that again once you open it. I'll pop that open into this tab to show. So there it did upload those images, but I can open a project. I'll open this one, which I keep using. It should, yeah, leave that. It should open up the samples pretty quickly, but there's no trained state that's going to open. So if you want to save the trained state, then you need to, you need to train it again if you just saved it with the tab on the side. But here I've trained it so then I can export the model. And so if you want it to be as both, like you could download it or use a shareable link, but you'd need to open both if you want to open it in the same state where things are now. Otherwise, if you don't have a silly large number of epochs, like this one that's taking hours to do, then you could just do it again. But like if you've done something silly big, make sure you export the model and don't fall into the trap of thinking that just because you saved the project here, that you saved the training state. Those are two different things you need to save, which confused me and led to a little bit of frustration when I thought I was saving something that I wasn't. But it's not really that hard as long as you're aware of it. And I see Kalina looking anxious to share things, so I should stop sharing my screen now.
No, don't please, actually. Keep your screen just as is, because I want to just very quickly point on something. Because I have been showing quite a lot of code and things. And what Michael is showing is really how all of you teachers can do this in your classrooms without any need to code whatsoever. And to show you how exactly that is, I'm actually right now taking a screenshot of Michael's screen, who is sharing it, and I'm going to paste it in the presentation that we are presenting right now. So let's hope that I do not mess the sharing and all of this stuff, because I really want to point out that what you see here can actually be seen in the code that I've already been showing you. And to do that, I'm also going to put a screenshot of my code. And just give me another second.
And this is something you guys can feed back to us as well, if you're interested, because it's something we're interested in. But throughout the whole course, we're trying to strike a balance between the theoretical basis of everything that's happening, which is mainly what Kalina is talking about, and then what's handy to use in a classroom or what's already ready. The idea being that it's good to have a foundational knowledge of things. Some of you might be interested in going a lot further with that. Certainly any of you who are asking Kalina for the code probably are, at least to some level. But we're aware that some of you mainly just want to know what you can use in your classroom. So hopefully we're getting the balance fairly right for most of you on that. But different people will have different learning goals. So for some, you might really just be interested in the code and not care about what could work in a classroom. Some of you are quite the opposite. So feel free to let us know at some point how we're managing that balance. Whoa, Kalina took over control and stopped me sharing my screen.
Indeed, but we can all steal your screen in the presentation, because what I wanted to show here is that when you are all setting the training parameters in the model that you've created, you see how you are managing the number of epochs from here. Well, this is what you do here on this line of my code, which I've also screenshotted just now. The batch size can be easily controlled from fitting the model here and training it. And the learning rate, okay, you find it a little bit more upwards here in the model compile part. But you see how here the learning rate is 10 to the power of -3. Well, for my model, for reasons I'm not going to go into now, it's 10 to the power of -4. And I'm pointing at it right now. So basically, everything that you see that I'm writing in code, you can do very interactively here. And because we're running a little bit short on time, as always, but I am sure that you want to see how your doodles performed, and I'm ready with that and already tested it a few times before this. So I want to point out on why my model overfit, and I want to go back on training it, which, let's see, I trained it a couple times just to be sure. You see how the accuracy came here to 1. And because I have set it to 100 epochs, here, you see, it would just iterate and iterate and iterate over, and basically it got stuck. It learned all of the images I had provided when training, so it just set all of the neurons, all of the connections based on those images. And it wasn't able to really provide anything meaningful about any new images. So I retrained it on a more meaningful number of epochs, tried with 45, wasn't very happy. Then I went back down all the way down to 30, and this was quite good. So without further ado, let's take a look at yes.
Just a quick question on that. If you have more epochs than you need for the size of your data set, does it make it worse, or is it just wasting time recomputing, like in going over the same pathways that have already been fixed?
No, it does, because it feels the need to change the weights for each epoch.
Oh, so it's like, it would be like an analogy of somewhere where you're walking and wearing down the path on where you kept like walking over and over again.
So the number of epochs is really important. So once I've done this, right, I took some of your images, I took 10 of them, and we have a little bit more, but I decided to keep it to 10 because it was going to take a lot more time. But in the presentation, I'm actually going to put all of them, and I'm going to run them through the saliency map generator to see where your drawings are the strongest for identifying. But just to check, let's see, for example, like I named them image 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, just for the sake of it being easier to load and for the sake of it being anonymous. So let's see, this is image 7. Maybe one of you recognizes their image. I myself don't remember by this point who submitted that. Image 6. This one's very, very good and very, very confusing. We're about to see. I actually don't remember what it said. A beautiful cat, image 5. And here is image 4, which is a dog. So let's see. And my computer might get a little bit slower because I am torturing it right now. So I'm going to use the loading of the already trained model. And let's start with, I just want to take the name right, image 4. So if we remember image 4, this was image 4. So we all see and agree that it is a dog. And hope that the author agrees too. So let's see. Well, our algorithm, our model is correct. The image is a dog.
Hooray!
So overjoyed. So yeah, we have applause from Farah. And now let's see with this cat, which was drawn by the author of this cat, and this dog is obviously different, but I have to say it. So let's see this cat. It's image 5. I need to be sure about the naming because I still haven't made that part very user-friendly. Okay. Image 5 is a cat. So that's very good. This time I've managed to train it properly, and I have to say that I am indeed surprised that it works so well. So let's see how it works for that confusing image. So
well, and just as you're typing this for the image, it's worth noting too, the analogy Kalina used right at the beginning of children's books, teaching kids about different animals and having children learn what different animals look like. The majority of children's books don't use photographs. They use artist representations of animals. And so we're not directly teaching what animals look like, but we're teaching a common set of this is how we picture these animals to look. And remember how I said, I want to find a good data set for identifying animal versus plant cells. Those of you who have taught biology or looked down a microscope will know that a plant cell does not look like a textbook diagram of a plant cell. And I've gotten in arguments and with teachers. I went to Ghana well, several times, but I've made microscope attachments for smartphones. And when we were looking at cells, had teachers who said, no, that doesn't look like what the kids will be examined on for a cell. This is useless and counterproductive. And so there's a difference between what things look like or our agreed upon subset of what an image of things should look like. And it's a whole minefield of things to study, but like identifying your doodles when we train the algorithm based on photographs, that wasn't accidental, and there's a lot of discussion that can go on around that.
The confusing one was identified as a dog, and I'm going to run it through the saliency one, and in the next session we can begin with the results from that, because this was really like a semi-homework task. So I'm sure that there will be a lot more interesting cases. I just didn't have time live to go through all of them. But yes, we are going to for sure include it in the beginning of next session. And because we only have so little time, I think that it's time to wrap up for this. We saw how we do image classification by code. We saw how we can do it with teachable machine. And Michael, do you want to take the floor one last time for this session to tell us about the interesting homework that we have for next time?
Sure, and we'll do it from the slide on your screen, right?
Okay.
Perfect. Yeah, I don't need to reshare my screen. So it's a two-part one. The first part, either use Google Teachable Machine, which I showed, or if you already use a different program that you prefer, use anything you want. But like if you don't know where to start, use Teachable Machine and train an image generating model on anything of your choice. So you could do it on what we showed or anything we mentioned, like cells, animals, dogs, cats, your photos, someone else's photos, furniture, anything of your choice. Train it on how few or how many images you want. Like a good ballpark is probably a couple of tens will train it well. If you're busy and you don't want to bother getting a good data set, train it on 5 images. How it breaks is interesting for learning purposes. So train a model. The next one, and we intentionally, notice it says on the slide, no guidance is given here. Use an image generator to generate as ambiguous an image as possible to confuse the cat dog identifier. So finishing on that image of the dog cat, I don't know what we call that one. There's a perfect like endpoint. So whatever prompt you feel you can give, whatever generator you want. And if you don't know of any, just use GPT and say, can you find me a generator? It can give you a list of a bunch of ones. The list will be fairly wrong and not warn you about limits on how many you can generate. So like, be careful of things like that, but intentionally very little instruction given on that. Anything to add to that, Kalina?
Well, nothing to add, just to emphasize once more on that the next session is going to be about image generation. So this homework task, the second one, is really like the bridge between this session and the next one. Because although classification and generation are two like very, very different tasks, handling images and two-dimensional data is like a whole field in AI and machine learning. So this task is really to see how we can mess with the classification algorithm, but also to make the jump to actually generating images and to see how different types of AI clash, because you're going to use one type of AI to generate and pass this to another type of AI to classify. So it would be very, very good to see where this breaks, how and why. So this is why this is a very, very important task for us.
And also just like a slight warning, we're still going to talk a bit about classification next time. Like we haven't said everything we had to say. So if you come next time thinking, oh, it's just generation, if you guys say anything about classification, I'm out of here. Like you've been warned. We're still going to talk more about classification too. So with that, drawing to a close, just a couple of like admin heads up or warnings. A lot of you have probably noticed we haven't yet sent, well, and it came up in the email when I sent the Zoom link. We haven't yet sent the recording from last time. There's been a couple of hiccups with the Discovery Space communication team. So hopefully those will be sorted out and we'll have the recording both from last week and this week within the next couple of days. It'll be as soon as we can get it done. It's that's kind of how things go. And I realized that I'd been waiting for that to send a reminder or like to send, yeah, I guess a reminder of what the homework was for this time. But the people who missed the session live last time didn't get that. And so I'll send out more emails this week. Not a lot more, but like one soon. And then once we have the recording, something like that. So I think that's all the admin things. Anything from you, Kalina, or any questions from anyone before we say goodbye?
Well, nothing from me except a big thank you to everyone who joined us once again. And that we'll be very happy to see you again next week. Oh, and also, once again, everyone who submitted a drawing or an image, you will find it in the slides of this presentation, because I really need the time to run all of them through the code, but I will make sure that I do it for every single one of the drawings or images that you have provided us with. So when we send you the presentation, it will contain slides with, of course, absolutely anonymous photos and drawings, with also a little bit of like a debrief on why they were categorized as such. And if someone has second thoughts and doesn't want their drawing to come up in the slides, please just write us an email and we'll exclude this.
And so I think that's everything. So thank you everyone for joining us and have a great evening, everyone.